One of the things I've learned after more than 2 decades of helping women on their fertility journey is that fertility isn't just physical, it's mental, emotional, and spiritual too. And sometimes it's grief. Not just the grief of a miscarriage or a pregnancy loss, but the grief of another negative pregnancy test, another failed treatment cycle, another month of hoping, another pregnancy announcement, another reminder that your journey isn't unfolding the way you always imagined it would. And yet, so many women carry this grief silently because they don't even realize that's what they're experiencing. Trying to conceive isn't just a physical journey, it's one of the most mentally and emotionally demanding experiences a couple can go through. And it's time we start talking about all of it. Hi, I'm Denise and your fertility godmother, and this show is for the woman who wants to optimize their health, who is trying to conceive and wants real, honest support, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, without the overwhelm. Because this journey isn't just about getting pregnant. It's about who you become through it. And you don't have to navigate it alone. So take a deep breath. You're in the right place. Let's do this together. And welcome to the Fertility Godmother Show. My guest today has dedicated her work to helping women navigate these deeply personal and often invisible losses. Kerri-Anne Brown is a licensed mental health counselor who specializes in infertility, pregnancy loss, reproductive trauma, and pregnancy after loss. Through her counseling practice, she helps women move through some of the most emotional, challenging seasons of their lives with a greater understanding, compassion, and hope. Today, we are talking about the grief nobody talks about on the fertility journey, the grief of lost time, lost expectations, lost innocence, and sometimes even the grief of becoming someone you never expected to be. We're also exploring the cost of carrying that grief alone, how it can affect our emotional well-being, relationships, and sense of self, and what healing can actually look like. Because if you've ever felt heartbroken, overwhelmed, stuck, anxious, or simply exhausted by your fertility journey, I want you to know you're not alone. So please join me in welcoming Kerri-Anne Brown. Hi, thank you so much for coming and joining us here today for this very important conversation. I'm really excited about having you on.
Thank
Even
you,
though it's a difficult
Denise.
conversation, it's going to be so amazing. So thank you so much.
I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Well, will you share a little bit about why you do what you do? Let's start there.
So I like to describe it as this work called me and chose me as opposed to the other way around. Prior to specializing in this area, I was working mostly with couples, and a lot of my couples were struggling. They were coming in because they were struggling with fertility issues, pregnancy loss, and so I was naturally working with that in my practice. And so that was something that I really enjoyed doing and helping couples go from, feeling disconnected around how they were grieving this shared experience of loss and infertility. And so that really kind of was like my opening to this area. And then for myself, I also experienced disruption in how I thought my family building was going to go. And so the combination of the two just really solidified for me that this was really what I was called to do, how I was called to help. So that's how I arrived here to this work.
Oh, beautiful. So grateful for that. And it's interesting how things just show up on our path when we're not looking for them in so many ways. How would you uh, define grief? Like I know can we get maybe a little clarity about just what grief is?
For me, it's really simple. It's a natural and normal response to a loss, any type of loss, and a disruption in your dream, your hope, your expectations of what you think becoming a parent is going to look like is a loss. And so grief would make sense, right?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I think we usually think of grief of like when somebody dies, but this is kind of part of that. We're not sure when someone's going through fertility, we're not sure. They don't know. There's so much uncertainty. Is it going to work for them? Right. And there's a lot of
Mhm.
grief that comes sometimes every month.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's what makes this particular type of grief so unique and complex because it's grief on repeat. It's not a singular event. It's like you mentioned, every month, every cycle, every failed pregnancy test, every failed embryo transfer, every canceled embryo transfer. It's loss, repeated loss.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, what are some healthy ways to navigate this as someone's going through their fertility journey?
It's the biggest and most important thing, I think, is to acknowledge what you're really grieving, to really have an understanding of what this is. Because if we don't, then we run the risk of minimizing the loss, dismissing it, suppressing it. And so I like to really help clients understand the magnitude of what they're really grieving. And that looks like starting with the story. What were the dreams, the hopes, the expectations, the desires, how you saw yourself arriving into parenthood, and getting all the details about that. Because for a lot of people, that story started a long time ago. And we become psychological parents before we become physical parents, right? We're thinking about it. We're thinking about what it's going to look like, how many children maybe we want to have, how many years apart. Is the home going to be big enough? Do we need to get a bigger home? What do the schools in the neighborhood look like, right? That's all part of the story. So we start with talking about the story. What were you really hoping for? And then what actually happened? And then we get to see how far we are, how the story went off course. How far are we away from what we really wanted to happen? And then we can really see the disconnect and what we're actually grieving by naming the losses. There's no loss that's too small or too insignificant. And we have to really name them and acknowledge them so we can make room to grieve them then.
I love that. Naming the loss, naming that whatever that situation is. What do you see happens when we name that grief, no matter how big it is?
Mhm.
What do you see that happens?
Then we begin to understand what we're really grieving. We have language for what we're really grieving,
Mm,
right? And so our relationship with the grief changes.
I love that. Yeah, that makes sense because sometimes when we're grieving, I know from my own experience, you you don't have the words. Sometimes
Yeah.
you just don't have the words. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you just create a little definition around it, or I don't know, a little, but if you create a definition around it, that can help you work through it, I would imagine.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. How would you help somebody who intellectually knows that they're, feeling a certain emotion, but yet they're in their body, they can't like get that congruent. Do you know, there's that disconnect. They feel it
Mhm.
in their
Mhm.
body, they intellectualize it, but they can't move through that.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And it is such an embodied experience, right? Like mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, right?
Right.
So I do invite clients in to notice where in their body are they feeling the grief, holding the grief. Because people often, it's easier to intellectualize and stay cerebral, like how we're thinking about the grief. And so, yeah, I think it's important to really identify what does that grief feel like in our bodies and slowing down enough to notice what are we sensing in our bodies and our bodily sensations? How is it showing up? And it shows up different ways for different people. And so it's really getting to know your unique grief experience. We're in relationship with grief. So like with any relationship, We spend time with it, we get to know it, right? So it's the same. I see it the same with grief.
Yeah. Being okay with that, being able to
Yeah.
experience all the emotions.
Yeah. Because the grief is not the problem. We don't want to villainize the grief. The problem is the problem, right? Like not being able to conceive or maintain a pregnancy, that's the problem. The grief is not the problem. That's not something that we need to like fix or, you know, make it go away. It's not the problem. It's a normal, natural response to loss.
So, not make it go away, you said. We don't need to make it go away. So, how I think you have a process you shared with me. How would we go through that process so that it doesn't feel like it's overcoming our life?
Hmm. Hmm. So we talked about the importance of acknowledging, naming the losses, talking about it, right? Giving language to it, and then also helping others understand, because that's the other part of it. It's a disenfranchised type of grief. In our society, we don't really think about this as a grief experience. And so as a result, our world kind of becomes a little smaller. We start to isolate and withdraw from people because we don't feel like people really understand. They don't know how to support us. So we isolate and withdraw, which doesn't feel good and it doesn't really help. So part of the grief work is talking about it, like finding safe spaces and safe people where you can share your story, you can share your experience, and you can be supported.
Beautiful. So those are the pretty much the 4 steps of trying to help us move through that and process that grief. Just for clarity, as we're talking about this, what are some of the emotions that grief that we would experience during grief? Like, how would we know we're going
Mhm.
through that?
So I can share some common ones. There are lots, and we move through them, right? There's probably the most obvious, biggest one is the sadness. But there's also anger. Like sometimes people feel really angry, they feel like it's not fair. They're doing all the right things and eating all the right things and taking care of themselves and their bodies, working so hard. Why is this not happening? And learning and recognizing, maybe for the first time ever, that effort doesn't equal outcome, right? Like you can work hard and not get the desired results. And that's really upsetting. So anger makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So jealousy sometimes, right? Seeing other people achieve the thing that you are working so hard to achieve and then feeling guilt about feeling those feelings, right? It's very complex. So there's a lot of emotions, self blame. What did I do to deserve this? What did I do wrong? What am I, you know, is this a punishment for something in the past? So there's also that regret, shows up sometimes. Did I wait too long to try? Should I have started family planning sooner? So just questioning, life choices. You can really get it's like a rabbit hole, right? Because we don't really have the answers to some of these questions we might be asking ourselves.
Right. No. So that's interesting that these are the experiences of grief. That's why I was asking because I mean, we can to be able to, like you said, to be able to put that name on that and be able to work through that. I wouldn't have known that. So thank you for clarifying that. I wouldn't have
Mhm.
categorized those under grief. But I remember reading an article about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross about the stages of
Mhm.
grief and how she said something when she was towards the end of her life that she if she could have she would have written another book about the different how she has the different stages of life or grief we go through. She would have changed it. She said that they weren't limited to those emotions and they weren't always in that order. Is that
Correct.
what your
Mhm.
experience? Yeah. Yeah.
Correct. And it's interesting because those 4 stages of grief that she outlined were really for someone anticipating their own death and some stages that they may experience as a result. So that grief model doesn't really apply to this. And so I think we've kind of taken it and used it for like all grief experiences, and it doesn't necessarily fit. So then people end up feeling like they're grieving wrong, right? They're not doing it right. Or when the reality is, it doesn't have stages necessarily, and it's not linear. There's not a sequence of, steps that you have to follow. It's a unique, deeply personal experience that doesn't, we can't really wrap it up in a nice little, you know, package with a bow on it?
Right, and so it's so I think it's great to know you're not supposed to have, like, what is, like, what was it? Denial first and anger, right? We're not
Mhm.
supposed to go in that
Mhm.
order, they can go in any order, and then as you
Yeah,
mentioned, there can be a whole broad spectrum of different emotions and
exactly.
feelings that we're going through. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's very helpful. What do women often tell you after they've gone through this grief work that they wish they would have known sooner?
Ooh, I like that question. That they wish that they knew sooner. I've heard people feeling like they wish that they knew that there was no timeline. It's a big one. People feeling like, man, I've been grieving for so long. How long should I be grieving for? Like there are rules around grief, right? Like there's a timeline, a start point, an end point. There's a right way to do it, a wrong way to do it. Like these ideas and beliefs that we have around grief. Sometimes we don't even know that we're coming into our grief experience with certain expectations of ourselves of how we should be grieving. And so the realization of there isn't a timeline. I'm not wrong for grieving a year, 2 years, however long after my experience. People really struggle with how the shoulds. I shouldn't be feeling this. I shouldn't be feeling that. I should be doing this. I shouldn't be like these rules, these arbitrary rules that either they have created for themselves or society has kind of like put them in that box. And so realizing that there's a lot of freedom here. You don't have to subscribe to any of those things.
Right, right. And that I love that you brought that up because that's something that I see a lot. I mean, at a certain point, just for own life experience to be able to embrace the joy and live a full life, at some point we would want that, I would think, that grief to stop or to diminish. So does it ever stop?
So I don't necessarily, people have different thoughts on this, right?
Great.
Um, and so I think for me, it's the belief that it doesn't really go away. What ends up happening is we learn how to move through our life alongside the grief, versus it like, you know, being something that we never ever feel or think about again. We just learn how to live with it.
Mhm. So that it doesn't control necessarily our feelings anymore or control
Hmm.
how we do life, but it's kind of just
Hmm.
in the background a little bit there when it like a
Hmm.
birthday party or a pregnancy announcement or
Yeah,
some type of
exactly. You might
yeah.
experience waves of it, right? Yeah. Hmm. It can, yeah, for sure, for a lot of people, right? Especially around certain like milestones or significant dates. The date of like when they should have been, had a delivery date, or if the transfer was successful, they would have been pregnant by this date, and then right, all the math that we end up doing, all the math. So there's some dates that can feel really significant, that there can be a wave that comes around certain dates. And sometimes it's just random. It's a random Tuesday. You're at the grocery store and you see a little baby. And then there's that sadness that arrives in that moment of like, that should be me. I wish that was me or something. Right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Very good. Very good. What is something that you help women work through that they're often surprised is related to grief?
Fear of like making plans or committing to plans because grief changes you in profound ways, right? And when we were moving through the world with like a certain set of like core beliefs, and then loss just shatters that. It changes the way that we think, changes the way that we think about ourselves, the way that we relate to others, the way that we see the world. And so as a result, our attitudes and behaviors can also change. And so that might look like being a little bit more guarded in relationships, not really wanting to be close because if you have a loss, it's going to feel really painful. And so then we become really protective. If I just be a little bit guarded, I can protect myself from the pain of another loss. So that's just one of many ways that, people don't recognize that how they're showing up in their relationships has changed as a result of grief. So helping them to see that connection can help them to be more thoughtful of like, well, is this how I want to show up in my relationships? Does that feel good to me? Does that feel aligned with my values? So that they can start to make decisions for themselves about how they want to live from a place of like alignment and clarity instead of from a place of like fear and avoidance. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, reminding them, being conscious, like asking themselves the question, how do I want to show up? Who do I want to be, in the situation, and like really tapping into that instead of the patterns of the loss or that keeps
Mm.
repeating itself. So
Yeah.
that
Hmm.
helps them move forward.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And just understanding too that grief can coexist alongside other things, right? So you can have joy and grief. You can have hope and grief, right?
Yeah. You can have multiple emotions at the same time. Yeah. And what about the guilt that goes with that, with the grief, or like
Mm-hmm.
feeling the
Mm-hmm.
joy and maybe I shouldn't feel happy right now. Like, what about
Mm-hmm.
that?
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
So I ask, says who? Who's saying that you shouldn't? Who's making these rules? Right? Where is that coming from? That belief that you shouldn't have these feelings. And that's also another coexisting thing, right? The guilt. And we can feel guilt, fear, sadness, and still do the thing, right? Like we don't have to wait until all those things go away. And then us humans are really complex beings,
We
yeah.
are. We can make things really complicated too.
Yeah. So the guilt is really, so there's a difference between like guilt and shame, right? So like shame is like, I am bad and I'm ashamed about, you know, who I am. And then guilt is like, I did something bad and I feel guilty about the thing that I did. And so what I would ask is, what's the thing that you did or are doing that's making you feel guilty? What's the bad thing? What about what's happening is bad? That's a direct result of you. So when we can separate a feeling from who we are, so we have a feeling, we're not our feelings.
That's right. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have our feeling. Separate the feelings from who we are.
Hmm.
I love that you brought up shame because that can be related. And there's a lot of shame
Absolutely.
on this journey, on the fertility
Hmm.
journey. And when you say that I am, and you defined it as really feeling like you are that negative feeling or
Hmm.
situation. Can you share a little bit about that, about shame?
Yeah. That you're right. That comes up a lot. A lot of shame around having fertility struggles. We like to believe that we have a lot more control over things than we actually do. We can't will our bodies to do the things that we want them to do. We can't think our way. Like, if I think about it, if I think hard enough, then I can make it happen. No different than we can will our heart to beat at the right pace, at the right, you know what I mean? Like, it just happens without us having to like work hard to make it happen or think about it too much to make it happen. So it's separating again the experience from who you are as a person. Infertility is not a moral failure. It's a medical diagnosis, right? Like, if we were, it is a medical diagnosis, and it's something that's happening to you, not because of you. And I think that's a very important distinction.
Yeah, right. I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm gonna go ahead and ask this question because I think it's in a lot of times in life, the way our perspective, how we look at things. Like, so I've trained myself to look at things instead of things happening to me, happening for me. And I notice a lot of women that I work with after they've gone through the fertility journey, whether they have their child or if they don't, they look back and they can find the blessings, the gifts that have
Mhm.
been in through that journey. Is there a way to do that, like, a little bit sooner? Do you know what I mean? Like, looking for the looking for the gifts through?
That's a very delicate thing.
It is, yeah. That's why I'm asking you.
Um, yeah, that has to be handled with so much delicacy because someone has to be ready to see it that way. And when you're in the of a significant heartache and heartbreak, it's hard to see that this is for my good or to believe that this could be for your good in any way, you know? And there's no rush to arrive at that place either, you know? So that is just really individual. Like, you have some people that they're seeking that. They're like, I want to know or believe that this is in some way, maybe if I can't fully understand it right now, that this is for my good. Some people are searching for that, and then some people are not. And so it's really just, you know, finding out for that person, like meeting people where they are. If they're ready for that, great. Let's do that and try to make meaning out of it and what purpose this could, serve you. But the person has to want that and be ready for that. So I never force that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not a force. It's just definitely.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's a shift and whenever they're ready for that.
Mhm.
Is that what
Yeah.
I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because imagine trying to convince someone that it's for the best that they're not able to get pregnant right now. And then for them what they're thinking is, no, what would be best is that I have a healthy pregnancy and a healthy baby. That's what's best, you know?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're maybe not at that point where they can look back and go, "Wow, I had so much." I healed my,
Mhm. Mhm.
relationship with the emotional energy with my parents,
Mhm.
my mom or my dad
Mhm.
or whatever it may
Mhm.
be, right? Or they healed their bodies, like, from a health
Yeah.
standpoint before that completely put them on a different trajectory.
Mhm.
They don't they're not
Mhm.
they're not anywhere there yet. They can't see that.
Yeah, they can't see that yet. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, Yeah.
Right. Do you have any stories, Carrie, that you can share with us about somebody who's, went through a grief experience and how they came out of it?
Yeah. So I had someone that I was working with that was on a very, very long fertility journey and, tried all the things, did all the things, and it just wasn't successful. And we weren't really worked to sort of like rewrite the story, like, the original story of how I thought things were going to go. And the deeper you're attached to that story, it's almost like the more painful. the experience is when it doesn't go the way that you are wanting it to go. We can't control what is happening to us, but we can rewrite the story. Here's what I intended. Here's what I expected. Here's what I hoped for. This is where I am now. Not where I planned to be, but this is where I am now. How do I want to move forward? Sometimes that looks like exploring alternative paths to family building, or sometimes that looks like this is where my family building story ends. And maybe that, leads to arriving to, childless by circumstances, or looking at alternative paths, donor conception, something else. But it's helping them to take ownership of their story and figuring out how they want to write the rest of the remaining chapters. And that can feel really empowering for people. Like I didn't choose what happened to me, but I get to choose what happens from here, how I want to move forward, from here. And the kind of person that I want to be, from this point. Because grief has a way of changing you in very profound ways.
And so really just empowering them to rewrite their story and
Mhm.
kind of bringing them back to, that we're more than our fertility and
Exactly. Yes.
getting back in touch with what do you really want? What do you want? What do you want
Hmm.
now? I love that. That's beautiful.
Love what you just said about we're worth more than our fertility because for a lot of people, their worth is defined by becoming a parent. And when that doesn't happen, it does affect your self worth, your self esteem, how you see yourself. So, yeah, definitely separating your worth from the outcome of your fertility story. We're worth so much more than that.
100%. I agree. 100%.
Mhm.
What's some of the best advice you've ever seen personally?
The best advice that I have seen, that I have received. Okay. Okay. The story we tell ourselves is extremely powerful. What story are we telling ourselves about what's happening to us?
I love that. What
Hmm.
story are we telling ourselves about what's happening to us?
Hmm. The stories hold a lot of power. And a story can feel true, it doesn't automatically make it true.
That's
So we
powerful.
really want to ask, like, is this a true story or it just feels true? This is what it feels like because feelings are not facts.
That's right. That's right. That is powerful. That moved me. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Your feelings are not always true. And it comes back to what you were talking about earlier, just really asking ourselves those questions and maybe changing the questions that we're asking ourselves so that we can,
Hmm.
yeah, I love that. For the women listening right now who are grieving a pregnancy, a miscarriage, a failed IVF, or simply the fact that her fertility journey isn't unfolding the way she hoped, what would you want her to know?
What you said earlier, I think it's important to come back to that is that you're worthy of of so much care. And how you care for yourself during your fertility journey, especially if it's like a difficult journey, matters. You don't have to wait until you're at the end of your journey to get support. You're worth more than the outcome of whatever happens. You can get the support that you need while you're on the journey. You are, what else? There's so many things that I want to say.
Yeah, great.
The grief is not the problem. It's not something that needs to be fixed, right? Like the problem is the problem. You are not the problem. This is happening to you, not because of you. It's not your fault. What other things would be helpful? The fertility journey is a grief experience. So you are allowed to grieve that and to feel what you feel. There's no wrong feeling. There's no right feeling. There's not feeling too much or too little. You feel what you feel, and it's all allowed. It's all valid.
Love that. That's beautiful. 'Cause a lot of women think that they're doing something wrong or they're things. So thank you so much. Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to leave our audience with? Can you share like how they can find you?
Yes. I can be found on Instagram at HWW Counseling and on my website, healingwithwisdom.com. Thank you.
And I'll definitely put the links in the description below so you can access those for if you want to reach out to Carrie. And is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I think we covered so much, and we honestly really could talk, you know, so much more about this. Yes. But yeah, I think that, the understanding what it is that you're grieving, naming the losses, all of them, as there's no loss that's like too minor or too insignificant. So that will be a really helpful exercise to start with, is to really understand what it is that you're really grieving. The loss of health. Maybe you considered yourself to be a healthy person before, and now all of a sudden you have a medical diagnosis and treatment recommendations coming at you and treatment options to consider. It's the loss of health, the loss of control, the loss of sense of identity. How could you possibly feel like you did like your old self when the worst thing has happened to you? You know, changes in your relationships, like name them all, name all of the losses, the things that are impacted and different as a result. So you have your primary loss, right, which is the loss of your fertility, and then all these secondary losses. Name them, identify them, acknowledge them so that you can grieve them.
Beautiful. Name them, identify them, and acknowledge them so you can grieve them.
Mhm.
Beautiful. That's very words of wisdom, very wonderful words of wisdom. So thank you so much again, Carrie. This is a very heartfelt, meaningful conversation. I really learned a lot, and I'm so grateful that you came on today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Denise.
All right. And for the audience, you can find again her information in the links below, in the caption below. And until next time, I'll see you soon.